My mother looked right at me and said, "This isn't your place, Jenna." But before she could finish her little speech about loyalty and legacy, the lawyer walked in, uninvited, carrying a sealed envelope. He opened it, read aloud the real will, and named me the sole heir. "Hi, I'm Jenna Walker." And until that moment, I thought I was just the invisible daughter, quiet, dependable, forgotten. But what happened in that room changed everything. You won't believe how far someone will go to rewrite the past, or how calm I stayed when I claimed what was mine. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I should have known from the moment I stepped through the front door. The scent of gardenias drifted in from the open windows, mixing with something buttery and fried, shrimp and grits, most likely. The table was set with silver chargers, cloth napkins folded into elaborate bows, and crystal glasses lined in precise rows. Everything gleamed. Everything was quiet. My mother, Corinne, glided past me in heels far too tall for a Sunday morning. Her pale pink blazer didn't have a single wrinkle, not even at the elbow. She nodded once, not quite meeting my eyes. "Happy birthday," I whispered to myself, because no one else seemed interested in saying it aloud. The brunch wasn't a surprise. I had received the invitation by text 4 days earlier, just a time and location. No emojis, no exclamation marks. Typical. What surprised me, though, was the mood. Tense, overly polite, like a company meeting that everyone had to attend but no one wanted to. I found my name on a place card beside a white linen napkin, folded, oddly, around what looked like a receipt. I opened it slowly. It was blank. At the other end of the table, Aunt Deborah chatted about someone's beach house renovation. Trish, her daughter, scrolled quietly on her phone. Neither looked in my direction. Corinne stood and clinked her glass. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate. Another year of growth," she began, voice smooth like a rehearsed voiceover. "Some milestones are gifts, not of things, but of awareness and responsibility." She didn't mention my name. She went on praising those who've carried forward the Walker values, citing contributions to the community, consistency, and, oddly specific, those who understand the weight of legacy. I looked down at my empty plate. A server brought out a tray of warm biscuits. I took one, more for something to hold than to eat. I kept my smile faint, polite, and practiced. I'd been doing that for years. Back in high school, Dad once told me, "One day you'll be the one everyone counts on." I'd believed him. I thought it meant something. Turns out it did, but not in the way I hoped. He passed last year, and since then, the house has felt colder, not because of temperature, but because of how quickly his voice vanished, like no one even tried to remember it. I excused myself halfway through the second round of mimosas and walked out to the porch. The spring air felt cleaner there, away from the tension inside. That's when I saw Julian parking on the curb. He walked up the steps quickly, holding a manila folder under one arm and a look of quiet concern in his eyes. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Work call." I nodded, trying to smile. "You're here. That's enough." He handed me the folder without another word. I opened it and froze. It was a will, dated a year before Dad's decline. Russell Walker's name, his signature, notarized and stamped. And right there, in bold text, I was listed as primary beneficiary of the family trust. My heart thudded against my ribs. "She never told me this existed," I whispered, eyes scanning the lines again and again. Julian looked at me, his voice low. "Then we should ask someone who would know why." Inside, someone laughed too loudly at something Corinne had said, but all I could hear was the roaring silence between my parents' promises and my reality. And just like that, I stopped feeling like the guest of honor and started feeling like a stranger in my own home. I used to throw receipts away without thinking. Grocery bags, coffee runs, even the rent payment slips. They all ended up in the recycling bin. It felt cleaner, less cluttered. But now, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by yellowed folders and crooked stacks of envelopes, I realized those little scraps had been my lifeline all along. The kettle let out a sharp whistle from the kitchen. I didn't move. I just stared at the coffee table where 3 different versions of my father's will lay side by side. Julian came in with 2 mugs. "Decaf for you," he said gently, handing me the one with the chip near the handle. I found it hiding behind the tea box. I took it and nodded. My fingers were cold. The windows were open, letting in the Charleston night air. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then stopped. Inside, everything was paper and silence. Julian sat beside me and picked up one of the printouts. "This is the one you found in your mom's folder, right?" I nodded. No signature, no witness, just typed. He scanned it slowly. "It's formatted like a will, but without notarization, it doesn't hold water, and digital signatures aren't valid for estate transfers in South Carolina. Not like this." I looked down at the pile of receipts in front of me. Grocery bills, insurance payments, my dad's medication copays, and more recently, a $7,200 transfer labeled house repairs. Except there had been no repairs, just Mom's trip to Palm Beach. Julian gently moved one of the stacks. "You kept all of these?" Dad used to say, "People forget, but paper doesn't." I gave a quiet laugh. I thought he was just being dramatic. Turns out he was preparing me. We kept going. Mortgage statements I had co-signed, a dental procedure I'd covered for my cousin Trish, a credit card bill under Corinne's name, but linked to my account. It all pointed to something I'd tried to ignore for years. I'd become the family's safety net, and not once had anyone asked how I was doing. Julian opened a thin red folder and paused. "This one's notarized," he said, "signed by Russell Walker and witnessed by Joseph Linwood." I looked up. "You know him?" "Reputation, mostly. Been around forever. Old school. Does things by the book. If he signed off on this, it's the real deal." I leaned in. The signature was clear. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, looped and slanted just slightly. My name was listed plainly right after his. "Primary beneficiary," it said. No clauses, no contingencies, just fact. I leaned back and exhaled. "Then what the hell is this other version?" Julian shook his head. "That's what we need to find out." I was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pattern of shadows cast by the blinds across the floor. Then I said, "Last month, I came by the house unannounced. Mom was in the den. She had the shredder running." Julian looked over. "What was she shredding?" "She said old utility bills, but she jumped when she saw me." "Do you think?" "I don't know, but she's always had a way of cleaning up problems before anyone notices." He picked up his phone. "I'm calling Linwood." "Now? Why wait?" He walked into the hallway, leaving me with my thoughts and the quiet hum of the city outside. I traced my finger along the edge of the notarized will. I hadn't cried. Not when Dad passed, not when the brunch turned cold, and not when I found out I might have been cut out of his final words. But tonight I felt something shift. Not sadness, not even anger. Something sharper. Something like truth. Julian came back a minute later, holding the phone between us. "He's on." A deep voice greeted me. "Ms. Walker, this is Joseph Linwood. I understand you have questions about your father's estate." "Yes," I said, steady. "Did my father ever request to change his will before his condition declined?" There was a pause. "Yes," Linwood said. "Your mother approached me twice. Once formally, once informally. But your father declined to make any changes. He was very clear." I swallowed. "Then what about this version I found? It removes me entirely." Another pause. Then his voice turned firm. "If that version says you were removed, Ms. Walker, it is not legitimate. You were never taken out. That document is not binding." Outside, a breeze pushed the blinds gently inward. I felt the cold air settle across my shoulders, and then I knew this wasn't just miscommunication. It wasn't grief or forgetfulness. It was something else, something deliberate. The envelope wasn't addressed to me. It was tucked halfway under a stack of circulars on the mail table, wedged between a coupon booklet and a wine-stained coaster from last Christmas. No name, no handwritten note. Just cream cardstock with the Walker Family Legacy Session, printed in serif font, like an alumni event for people who'd all pretended to like each other. I stood there a long time before picking it up. I flipped it over. Still blank. No RSVP instructions. No mention of me. Corinne once told me, "Don't insert yourself into conversations you weren't invited to." Her voice echoed in my mind now, just as clear as the day she said it. Fingertips grazing the rim of a champagne glass, her smile tight, her tone light enough to pass as maternal concern. But it had always been control, just dressed nicely. I set the envelope down and walked into the kitchen. The windows were open. Afternoon sun poured in, golden and heavy. Azaleas bloomed along the back fence, just beyond the screen door. They smelled like my childhood. Julian sat at the counter, reviewing something on his tablet. He looked up when he saw my face. "Let me guess," he said. "You weren't technically invited." "Nope." I opened the fridge. There were exactly 4 things. Old sparkling water, 1 lemon, leftover quiche, and a jar of peach preserves with a sticky lid. I closed it again. But the invitation was left in plain sight. That's how she does things. Silent messages. Julian turned off the screen. "Legally, you're still named in the trust. You have every right to be there." "She's betting I won't show," I said. "That I'll stay quiet like I always do." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Later that afternoon, I wandered up to the attic. The pull string light flickered once before settling into a dim amber glow. Dust floated through the beams like tiny ghosts. I hadn't been up here in years, not since Dad used to store fishing rods and old blueprints from his landscaping firm. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to remember how the house used to feel before inheritance folders and sealed envelopes started defining who belonged. But then, in the far corner behind a stack of empty photo frames, I saw it. A cedar box, lock still intact, JW carved into the lid. I paused. My initials. Dad's handwriting, no doubt. The lock popped open easily with a hairpin. I'd learned that trick in high school, mostly for fun. Inside, there was a thin plastic sleeve, yellowed at the edges, containing a single sheet of paper. It was my poem. Legacy. I'd written it my junior year of high school. It was about a garden that no one watered but still bloomed every spring. Dad had insisted on laminating it. I thought he was being dramatic, but now I understood. Beneath the poem sat a folded certificate, the original trust confirmation signed by Russell Walker, naming me as full successor and holder of rights to the family estate if anything happened to him. My fingers tightened around the edges. This wasn't about being left out of a party. This was about being quietly erased. I took a picture of the document with my phone and stepped back into the fading sunlight. The house felt quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. Back in my room, I sat at the edge of the bed and opened a text thread with Joseph Linwood. "Hi, Mr. Linwood. This is Jenna Walker. Would you happen to be available this Sunday for a brief family meeting? I believe my mother may be acting against the wishes of my father's trust. I have documentation. Please let me know." I hit send. Then I stared at the screen. Not out of doubt, but to listen. I used to wait for someone to talk me out of standing up for myself. This time, no one came. 10 minutes later, the reply appeared. "I'll be in Charleston Sunday. I'll bring the folder." I placed the phone face down and sat in stillness. No dramatic plans. No revenge speech. Just the truth, tucked quietly in a sealed envelope. It would speak louder than I ever had. I walked into the dining room expecting another one of Corinne's stiff brunches. polished silver, stiff napkins, and small talk no one really believed. But this time, there was a heaviness in the air that settled before a single word was spoken. The chandelier caught the late morning light, sending fractured reflections onto the linen-draped table. Every chair was filled. Uncle Wayne scratched at his collar. Trish smoothed her skirt. Aunt Deborah kept rearranging the butter knives like she'd forgotten how to sit still. At the head of the table, my mother stood with one hand resting on a thick ivory folder labeled "The Future of the Walker Estate." She wore her best pearls, her posture perfect, her hair curled just so, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Dad used to say, "Family meetings are where truths hide behind polite smiles." I remembered that now as I eased into my seat, my heart steady but slow. Julian stood behind me, one hand gently resting on the back of my chair. He didn't need to say anything. He'd already said enough, in the quiet way he showed up, in the way he listened when no one else did. Corinne cleared her throat. "Thank you all for being here. As you know, it's been a year of transitions, and today is about clarity, about securing the Walker legacy for generations to come." She passed out copies of the folder to each guest with the efficiency of a CEO. The room rustled as pages flipped in near unison. My copy, though, was noticeably thinner. I said nothing, just placed my fingertips on the corner of the page and waited. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "outlines a revised structure that reflects updated circumstances. Estate properties, trust allocations, ongoing contributions. You'll see a number of adjustments that ensure everything stays within the family and aligns with our values." She paused, letting her gaze pass over each face. When it reached mine, it lingered a moment too long. "Some of these changes may be unexpected," she continued, "but necessary." I looked around. No one said anything. Not Aunt Deborah, not Uncle Wayne, not even Trish, who was usually the first to ask if mimosa refills were allowed before noon. Corinne turned a page and began reading aloud from a section marked "Succession and Transfer." Her voice was smooth, unwavering. But before she could reach the next sentence, the front door opened. A gust of cooler air floated through the hallway, and then steady footsteps on the hardwood. Joseph Linwood entered the room with the calm presence of a man who'd spent decades telling people truths they didn't want to hear. "Good morning," he said, adjusting his glasses. Corinne froze. Her knuckles turned white on the edge of the table. "Joseph," she said tightly, "we weren't expecting—" "You weren't," he replied evenly, "but Jenna invited me, and considering the contents of this meeting, I thought it best to attend." Julian stepped aside, allowing him space. Joseph placed his briefcase on the buffet, unlatched it, and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed in legal-grade plastic. "I'm here to clarify something," he said. "There has been talk of revisions to Mr. Walker's will. I'm here to confirm that no such revisions were approved." He turned to me. "Ms. Walker, this is the last version of your father's notarized estate directive, signed in my presence." I nodded, lips pressed together. Joseph opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a printed document. It was crisp, pages clipped neatly. He held it up, then placed it flat on the table. "Russell Walker named Jenna Walker as the primary beneficiary of the Walker Trust and Estate, effective immediately upon his passing. There are no amendments, no retractions, and no valid secondary versions on file." Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. A stunned hush fell over the room. Aunt Deborah blinked slowly. Trish looked down, cheeks flushed. Uncle Wayne stared at the ceiling like maybe it could offer him an escape route. Corinne didn't move, not right away. Then slowly, her hand went to her neck. The string of pearls she always wore, the ones she'd once said were as reliable as family, shifted slightly as she adjusted her collar. One bead slipped loose. It hit the table with a sound smaller than a sigh. It rolled once, twice, then stopped. Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered, like a curtain caught mid-drift. "This is absurd," she said quietly. He must have changed it. He said—" Joseph folded his hands. He did not. Julian leaned in closer, his hand brushing mine beneath the table. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have words, but because the truth didn't need volume. It just needed space. Corinne straightened her shoulders. "You think this changes anything?" "No," I said. "I think it finally clarifies everything." No one clapped. No one shouted. No one even raised their voice. The only sound was the pearl settling against polished wood. No one spoke. Not immediately. Not after Joseph Linwood's declaration. Not after my mother's final, brittle defense, unraveled with the fall of a single pearl. The dining room, once filled with the soft clinking of forks and the careful rhythm of family performance, now sat hollow. The light had shifted, no longer golden, but a thin gray, stretching shadows across the table like spilled ink. Even the azaleas in the window seemed to lean away from the silence. Julian stayed close, his hand lightly brushing mine beneath the table, anchoring me in the stillness. Across the room, Aunt Deborah rose slowly, as though her bones weren't quite sure it was time to move. She walked toward me without her usual confidence, each step careful, deliberate. When she reached my side, she hesitated. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Jenna, if what he said is true, then—" "It is," I replied, not coldly, just firmly. I wasn't angry with her, not anymore, but I wasn't offering comfort either. Deborah nodded and looked away. "We all assumed, and we shouldn't have." She walked off without waiting for a response. I watched her go, then glanced around the room. Uncle Wayne was pouring himself a third glass of iced tea he probably didn't want. Trish stood by the piano, clutching her clutch like it might lift her off the ground. Conversations broke off whenever I turned their way. The room, once curated like a showroom, had fractured. And then I saw her, Corinne, standing just inside the archway to the foyer. Her hand rested against the door frame like she needed it to stay upright. Our eyes met. She motioned with her chin. "A word?" she asked softly. I followed her into the hallway but kept a few steps of space between us. The air was cooler here, shaded, lined with framed certificates and pictures of a life that now felt several lifetimes ago. She didn't look at me right away, just stared at her own reflection in the glass of the grandfather clock. "I never wanted this," she said. "Not like this." I waited. I thought I was protecting the family, the name, your father's legacy. I swallowed the answer I wanted to give. Let silence fill the cracks. Her voice wavered. "You should have trusted me, Jenna." I met her eyes then, clear, calm, without sharpness. "You erased me first, when you tried to rewrite the truth." Her breath caught, only slightly, but I saw it. She turned away. I did what I thought was best. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to clarify. Behind us, footsteps and murmurs grew faint as people began to trickle out. Julian and Joseph stood by the front door, speaking in low tones. Papers exchanged hands, folders closed, the formalities resumed, but the performance was over. Julian saw me watching and nodded once. Joseph walked over, his briefcase in one hand and a white envelope in the other. He handed it to me gently. "Your father left this, specifically for you," he said. I took it, surprised at its weight. It was sealed with wax, an old-fashioned touch he must have planned quietly, long before anything fell apart. "Thank you," I said. Joseph gave a small nod and turned away, leaving me with the envelope pressed between my fingers and 1,000 thoughts pressing against my ribs. Julian drove us home in silence. Even the city outside seemed to hush itself for the moment. Charleston's Sunday rhythm, a jogger here, a dog walker there, moved like background music we weren't part of yet. He parked in front of my apartment and didn't reach for the keys, just sat with me, waiting. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded page in my father's handwriting, slanted, blue ink, the kind he always used for signatures and birthday cards. If you're reading this, then you have the strength to reclaim not just what is yours, but who you truly are. I stopped reading. My eyes stayed on the page, but my mind flooded with memories of sitting on his lap while he read aloud, of him handing me my first checkbook and saying, "Trust the math, even when people lie," of the way he used to sign every school form with a flourish, like it mattered. Julian touched my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, blinking slowly. "Yeah," I said. "I think I'm finally starting to be." The sunlight poured in gently through the windows of Julian's apartment, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. It was early and the city hadn't quite woken up yet. Somewhere below us, the quiet hum of Charleston stirred slowly. Delivery trucks, cyclists, the first dog walker of the day. I stood near the window for a while, holding my coffee without drinking it, just letting the warmth rest against my palms. Behind me, Julian moved about the kitchen, the smell of toasted bread mixed with the faint notes of Miles Davis playing low on the stereo. It was a soft morning, a rare one, the kind that feels like a pause after something long and painful. I sat down on the edge of the couch and opened the envelope once more. My father's letter, the one Joseph had given me, rested in my lap. I had read it before, but today I read it differently, with stillness, with breath. He wrote about love, about regret, about the things he never had time to say out loud, but one line stayed with me most. Legacy is more than money. It is the measure of a life lived true. He had told me that once, long ago, when I'd brought home a rejection letter from a college writing contest. He said it again now through the page, like he knew one day I'd need it more than ever. Julian came in and sat beside me, offering a quiet smile. "Thinking about next steps?" I nodded. It feels strange, to have a say, to decide what to do with something that once felt so out of reach. He looked at me with steady eyes. "Maybe now's the time to make it yours. All of it." I turned the letter over. The paper was soft at the corners from where I had held it so many times. I don't want to use it to erase what happened. I want to build something better with it. "You could start that nonprofit you talked about," Julian offered. "The one for girls who age out of the system." I smiled. Or maybe a scholarship in his name, for kids who've had to raise themselves quietly. He nodded. "You don't have to decide today, but you get to decide." Later that week, I visited the trust office. It was a quiet building just off East Bay Street, tucked behind a florist and a used bookshop. The woman who handled my file, Ms. Graham, wore glasses on a string and had a voice like warm chamomile. She walked me through every detail, every clause. She didn't rush. She didn't patronize. And when I told her I planned to set aside part of the estate for community programs, she smiled and said, "Your father would be proud. And frankly, so am I." Outside the building, I stood still for a while. The breeze off the harbor tugged gently at my coat, and the air smelled faintly of salt and blossoms. I was no longer holding on to what had been taken. I was holding what had always been mine to define. That evening, I got a call from Aunt Linda. Her voice crackled faintly on the line, but there was warmth in it. "I just thought you should know," she said. "Most of the family has backed away from your mother. From the story she tried to push. Things look different now." I let that sit a moment. "And you?" "I'm sorry I didn't say more sooner," she said, "but I see you now, truly, and I hope you're doing okay." I thanked her. We didn't linger. Sometimes closure doesn't need long conversations. It just needs honesty. After the call, I poured myself another cup of tea and pulled out a notebook. Nothing fancy, just a lined journal I used for grocery lists and fleeting thoughts. I wrote down 3 things I wanted for the year ahead. Start the foundation. Write again. Choose peace, even when it's quiet. And at the bottom of the page, I added a 4th. Visit the garden where Dad used to sit. Just to sit there now, too. I closed the notebook and leaned back into the couch. Julian came over and set a blanket over my legs without a word. Outside the window, the Charleston skyline shimmered under the last of the sunlight. I looked out and thought to myself, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a legacy I will build with my own hands. And for the first time in a long while, that thought didn't scare me. It felt like home. That morning, as sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors and my father's letter rested in my lap, I realized something simple but powerful. I hadn't just reclaimed an inheritance, I had reclaimed myself. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. Family may falter, love may go quiet, but self-worth, that has to be chosen and protected. And perhaps that's the truest legacy a parent can leave behind. Not money, but the courage to live with honesty and dignity. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to pause and reflect. What legacy are you choosing to carry? And which one are you brave enough to rewrite?